Well, it's time to start our study of the French monarchy. And you might say, well, why do we need to study the French monarchy? Well, I hope I can explain well enough for you to see, one, where the Great Monarch comes from, his tie-in with the French monarchy and its connection to the Catholic Church. Two, how God prepared a lineage for him to come from. The Great Monarch is going to be doing a divine mission with the help of God. Then God would make the man he would want. Just any man would not do. It's not that way. When God works with someone, he chooses the lineage or from where that person comes. And this is why some people now, especially some of the evangelical or Protestant ministers, have commented, they say, oh, God chose this man. They're starting to say that, I noticed. Well, after he survived the assassination attempt from Butler, Pennsylvania, and it's been increasing since he won the presidency for the second time. They'll make comments like that. And that isn't exactly true. It isn't like God looked down on earth and said, let's see, who can I get to start this job now? And that guy looks good. I'll take him. It's not that way because, how do I know that? Because the Bible shows us this. God shows us the same patterns over and over. Now, so I want to show you how he prepared this man from the very beginning, at least a long, long time. God is the author of human history. A single person wouldn't do anyone. And the man did not just spring from nothing. God prepared a historical pathway. And we understand that people are not just a product of their environment, though environment plays a very big part, but they are also a product of their DNA. And I remember a time back when I was in grade school where DNA had not yet been discovered. So then comes a time where we discover it and we begin to see how certain people get blue eyes and some get brown and some get, different characteristics. I believe we've only scratched the surface of knowing how much the DNA controls. And the reason I say that is because I used to be a nurse in the OB, an obstetrical nurse, and I'd work in delivery and I'd work in postpartum. And I remember learning this fact. I was astounded by it. This woman had 5 children. And we brought her newborn baby to feed for the first time. Now, she only sees it in the delivery room for a few seconds, and we whisk it away to the nursery so it can be checked out by the doctors. Now she's getting her child for the first feeding. She's going to have her child for 20 minutes, and then we're going to pick it up and take it back to the nursery. And when I picked up the child to put it back in the crib and roll it back to the nursery, she said, she was astounded. She said, he is so different than my other 4. She said, this is going to be a real treat raising this one. And I thought, this baby is like 12 hours old or something. And you had him for 20 minutes in your hands and he doesn't talk. What did he say? How do you know he's so different? She said, there were just so many things. The way he acted and the way he reacted. And I said, well, I couldn't argue with the mother. She told me she already saw so many differences and that it was going to be a real trip raising this one. So the personality, tendencies, and the nature was already set from birth. Also, we know that our Blessed Mother, the Catholic Church, teaches that God had prepared her from the beginning of time. When he was ready to have his son come to earth, he certainly just, again, didn't look down and say, what woman? Let's see. I don't know. She's kind of fat. No. I think she's too bossy. No. From the beginning of time. And that's why he prepared her. She had to be special. And so she was excluded from original sin. Because God cannot be within a woman whose flesh had been corrupted by original sin. That was the one difference Mary had. So it's the same thing, I believe, with the Great Monarch. This person was prepared from the beginning of time. or at least for a long time, because the Lord prepared a lineage, a DNA with all of these characteristics that we have only scratched the surface on, to be in this man. He knows this man. He made him. He made him, as God told, I think it was Job, how can you say such things to me? I knew you from before you were in the womb. So he made this man, a man made for God's special mission. And now I also want to be able to show you that since I believe Donald Trump to be this great monarch, I'd like to be able to show you how possible and / probable it is, his connection with the French monarchy. So therefore, we have to study the French monarchy. And it's going to start right here with the fact that after the fall of the Roman Empire, the pagan one, not the Holy Roman Empire, the Roman Empire, which was about in the late 400s, about 470, I believe. Europe was nothing like today. It was not formed into nations. Rather, they were settled ethnogroups. Settled meaning they were not, for the most part, they were not nomadic. There were still some nomadic tribes in Europe. It was feudal estates. And they didn't have a loyalty. They couldn't be patriotic to a nation because nations didn't exist yet in Europe. But they had a lord or a leader, a tribal leader. And they had their loyalty to the person, the wealthiest among them or the most powerful, who sometimes they built castles or very fortified dwellings, and the other people sort of lived around there to be safe and secure, and for that they had a certain loyalty to their lord. And some of these settlements, you might call them, developed into actual cities, and some of them into kingdoms. Now, if a kingdom was too large for the leader to be able to make the journey out to check his distant lands in one day and get back within one day, he would divide up some property and give it to another to watch over, although he had to have loyalty to the Lord. And these were where your dukes and princes come in. Okay, but there were no nation states yet. Then came the next thing we want to see is the development of the French monarchy. So since there were no nations, there was no French monarchy. Now we had they were a tribe of Franks, and they lived in an area referred to as Gaul by the Romans. They had a leader named Clovis. Clovis, believe it or not, was only 15 years old. These kinds of things amaze me about history. He was married, and he was married to a Christian woman. And he was developing a lot of strength, conquering, you might say, a large part of the land that is now France. And he had to fight a certain tribe the next day. And he was very worried about it because they were very powerful. And he was discussing this with his wife, who came up with a great idea. Also, a sneaky way to convert him, but a great idea. See, this is what I mean. Where did this idea come from? Maybe you could agree with me. The Holy Spirit inspired her. And she said, if you would promise the God of the Christians that you would become a Christian if God granted you victory in this battle. And he said that was a great idea because he didn't have too many options. He wasn't too sure about winning. Of course, he did win the battle, and he kept his promise to become Christian or Catholic, because at that time, all the Christians were Catholic. Now, he was baptized by St. Remigius, the bishop there at that time of that group of Christians. And a miracle occurred at his baptism. A dove descended from heaven carrying an ampule of oil. And it was that oil which was used to baptize him and anoint him as the king of the Franks. Now, this sacred ampule of oil has been used over the centuries to anoint and coronate all of the French kings. It's kept in St. Remy's Cathedral. During the French Revolution, this ampule was broken because of the blasphemous behavior of the French Masons. They have to destroy everything that's holy and sacred. And they also hate all monarchies. And because, and you'll see why. Why did the Masons hate monarchies and spent centuries destroying just about every monarchy in Europe? And their hands were in it. Study enough history and you'll find out they had a hand in it. Even in the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which deposed the Tsar and Tsarina. And why do they hate monarchies? Because of the French monarchy. It established something called the divine right of kings to rule. See, in democracy, we the people, give our president or prime minister or leader the right to rule us. But in the French monarchy, it was a divine given right to rule. God was definitely saying, this is your king. Just like in the Bible, when he chose David out of all of Samuel's sons and had him anointed with oil. So, you see, God continues. These things are all shown us in the Bible, these patterns. God just doesn't usually make up something new, brand new, and spring it at us. So anyway, Clovis ruled, and he formed the dynasty, the first dynasty known as the Merovingian dynasty. However, those who followed after Clovis were not as strong kings. They were pretty laid back, and some of them were actually lazy. And as long as, I guess, they were eating well and having their royal parties and enjoying the royal court, there in the French monarchy was a role called the mayor of the palace. Be very similar to like in the White House where they have the chief of staff. Okay, and the mayor of the palace is actually almost, in this case with the Merovingians, almost running the monarchy, because they're the ones to whom everybody who wanted to see the king would come, and mayor of the palace would do speaking with them and consulting with them. So he knew everything that was going on. He was a very powerful person. And I think this is where that phrase, the power behind the throne, comes in. Because you might be seeing the king on the throne, but the one who was really running things was the man in the background. So the Merovingian dynasty ruled the Franks from about 500 to 751. Now, a name that we need to remember, if you put it in a category of famous men or women who have won battles that changed history, would be the name of Charles Martel, often called the Hammer. Now, Charles Martel was the mayor of the palace. That's that role that is very similar to chief of staff of the White House. He was the mayor of the palace for the last Merovingian king. And he was very upset with the way they were so weak. They really didn't get involved in their, in ruling the Franks. They just kind of laid back, and whatever happened, let whatever happen. And Charles Martel did not like this. Now, he had a son named Pepin, and he's called Pepin the Short. Pope Stephen II was having a lot of problems with the Lombards. The Lombards are in northern Italy. To this day, it's referred to as the Lombardic region of Italy. And they were constantly trying to attack the Pope. The Pope was supposed to be protected by the Byzantine Empire. But apparently they didn't do a very good job. The Pope came to see Pepin the Short. He came to France and met with him and with Charles Martel, Charles Martel was an illegitimately born child, so therefore he could not be the king. He met with Pepin and his father, Charles Martel, and they agreed to help the Pope. Pope Stephen was attracted to Charles Martel and Pepin the Short as to making a relationship and an alliance with the church because he needed help. Okay, if the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church, and that's Christendom, that's what's building Western Christian civilization, or did build Western Christian civilization. It would never have done it if the Pope keeps getting killed and decimated by the Muslims. And you can't expect the Pope to get up on a horse and start fighting. So he needed warriors. He needed secular help. And this is what he came to Pepin the Short for. Charles Martel had massive victories, not only against the Alemanni tribes that kept trying to come into the northern part of France, which Charles Martel and Clovis had already sealed off, trying to keep this area for the Franks. And he also had massive victories against the Muslims. The Battle of Tours was an immense victory for Pepin the Short and Father Charles Martel. So yes, they agreed to help the Pope keep Europe for Christian civilization. What the Pope agreed to, this is very striking, because remember the sacred ampule that baptized Clovis and started the Merovingian line of the dynasty. It still was not exactly the French monarchy, but just the Frankish kings, the line of Frankish kings. They decided that they had to get rid of the Merovingians, and the last one was Childeric III. And he was just, I guess, worthless, He might as well have been living on Social Security disability. There was nothing he did. So they asked the Pope. This is great because, if you're Catholic, you have a problem you really can't solve, you ask your pastor or priest. They asked the Pope, do you think that the king should be the man without any power, or should it be the man with power? And the Pope agreed the king should be the man who has the power, the influence, the army, who can run secular things. The Pope went ahead and allowed Pepin the Short to depose the last Merovingian king, Childeric, and his son. They were sent off to a monastery to live the rest of their life in seclusion. This family line and dynasty was called the Carolingians because Pepin had 2 sons. When Childeric and his son were sent to the monastery, and there's a portrait of this in which you see 3 monks holding him down, his arms, because they cut his hair off. This is symbolic. It means he was divested of all his royal power. His royal power went out of him, taken away from him. His right to be king following his father was removed. The line of the king of the Franks was removed from this family. Now, where do we see that in the Bible? Samson, when he had his hair cut, he lost all his power. It's symbolic. So, which reminds me, I just had my hair cut. We don't think that way now, do we? But, okay, at that time, that was symbolic. And they lived their life in seclusion then. Now, Pepin had the 2 sons, and you see that at this moment, when the Pope approves of Pepin deposing the last Merovingian king, what he is doing now, you say, well, why would God want that? Why would he go through all this trouble to send the dove down with the oil and all of a sudden that's no good? He is taking this monarchy, he is building this French monarchy. France has a special title in the church, and she's called the eldest daughter of the church. Because from France would come this spark that would form all of the Europe that we have known for all these centuries, called Western Christian civilization. So he uses France, God uses France for this. But he wants the monarchy not only to have his divine authority, which is what that divine oil meant, but he wants it to be blended with his church. And that's a really big thing. Where we see that is when our Lord was crucified, and Longinus took the spear and pierced his side with it. Water and blood came out. The blood, of course, that's the completion, a symbol of the completion of Christ's saving work. The blood is the redemption, and the water represents his church, the Holy Spirit, grace. The water of baptism that brings us into the church. So the two together are joined. And actually, this was part of his plan. Now there's an alliance. It's not just they rule with authority, divine authority, but the church and the secular power have been joined. This is so important. This is how you understand the future mission of the Great Monarch. You can read the prophecies and read them and you wonder, it'll say in the prophecies that he's going to work very closely with the Holy Pope. What does that mean? Why would he be working closely with the Holy Pope? If you ever think a little bit past what just you read in the prophecy. Well, it's because that's the spiritual power. But the church is in the world, and we have to have temporal power. We have to have the ruler of temporal powers to work with the church, just like when Pepin the Short, he's the son of the great man, Charles Martel, the great warrior, who really is called the father of France because of all the battles that he won, keeping that certain property, which was referred to as Gaul, and keeping it safe, protecting the borders, as Trump would say, protecting the borders, making a nation. It has to be a nation, shared language, shared culture, people who share the same values. You can't have strangers walking through your house. Then it wouldn't be your house. By doing this, he sets up, like I said, through the French monarchy, God is setting up, historically, a pathway. Now, if you're a real student of the Bible, you're quite familiar with prefigures, also parallels. And the parallel or the prefigure means that down the line, that same thing will occur, only in a more intense form. Just like we have in Exodus, you have the time where none of the stars gave light, it was totally black. That's a prefigure. There'd be a parallel in the end times, according to so many of the saints, of a time when there will be 3 days and nights of darkness. Of course, the Exodus was only in Egypt. This will be all over the world. It'll be a more intense form. So you can see that he's bringing and making a pathway through which this great monarch will come to us and come into history, and that God can work with him because he will have divine authority. We would call it nowadays divine help. But have you ever noticed how Donald Trump, in his second term, how he speaks to the other leaders of all these countries? It's almost like, when you're in school, in grade school, and the teacher is talking to Billy, you're not doing something right, and you need to stop that, or I'm going to have to tell your mom, or you're going to have to stay after school. You hear Trump, he talks like this with an authority. It's amazing. He tells this leader, you need to do this, you need to do that, or you're going to lose Europe. You need to stop the Muslims coming into your country. You need to do this. He told Iran, you need to get rid of your nuclear weapons. You need to stop your nuclear program, or else you'll be sorry. He gives people time, like the leader of Venezuela, Maduro. He warned him. He told him what he needed to do. I want these drugs stopped. They're not coming into the United States. They're responsible for killing over 30,000 Americans a year, and you need to stop this. He talks to people with such an authority these leaders. I don't mean common people. I'm talking about the leaders of this country. He tells off Keir Starmer. I mean, he just lays it right on the line. He said to him the other day, "You took the great out of Great Britain, and you're sure not any Churchill. And if they don't do right things according to who? Well, most Christians would agree to. We don't want nuclear war. We don't want drugs poisoning populations. The good people need to stick together, and we have to restore the world." You can see that Trump is not just, even though he talks about America first, and of course, he's massively interested in restoring and healing America, healing it. It was wonderful what he said at the National Prayer Breakfast. He says, "America needs God, and I want God back in American life." You see, he's telling us, like your teacher or your mother. He sounds like a teacher or principal or mother telling you need to eat your vegetables. If you don't, your eyes aren't going to be right, or you're not going to get strong bones. You won't grow up nice and tall like your brother. You need to drink your milk. He tells you what to do. He talks like one who has authority over the other leaders. Now, what does that remind us of? He's not talking like in the first among equals. No, he's talking like Peter spoke, and the other apostles knew he was the head guy. And we have so many world leaders already commenting on this during his first year of his second term. A very high up Saudi Arabian official is quoted as saying, if there was anyone who qualified as being president of the world, it's Donald Trump, president of the world. And when he speaks, these leaders that are not doing right, they start shaking in their boots. He has an authority. Never heard a president, and I'm not a young woman, never heard one of our presidents, or for that matter, any other world leader, talk to the other world leaders like that. Where does that come from? How does he know to do it? Because he knows what his mission is. So to summarize this part, Pepin got permission from the Pope, actually from Pope Zachary. Pepin was the son of Martel, Charles Martel. These are very important names, not just in French history, but in world history, and definitely in the European history and Western Christian civilization. Remember, it was Clovis I who was defining the greater part, at least, of the area that we now know in modern-day France. But it still was not yet a nation nor called France. It was still just the kingdom of the Franks. But Martel, and he was called, Clovis is therefore called the father of France because of the fact that he basically consolidated that part of the property or real estate in Europe that we call France today. But Pepin is the son of Martel, and he and Martel noticed that the last Merovingian king, which was Childeric III, was lazy, not too intelligent, and definitely not interested in being king. Now remember, Charles Martel was the mayor of the palace, which is kind of like chief of staff, so he had most of the power, actually. And he was quite sad at what he was seeing because he was afraid that these were ambitious men, Charles Martel and his son Pepin. And they wanted to keep this land. They were developing I guess you would call, not going past a tribal kind of pride into a heading towards what you might some say would be a national spirit of pride. They wanted to keep on developing what Clovis had begun. They wanted to protect it, the lands and this monarchy. But it seemed that it wasn't going to be that way with the last Merovingian king. So they went to Pope Zachary, and they asked Zachary. Now notice these were very strong Catholic men also. They didn't say, let's just get rid of King Childeric. We'll just poison his supper or something, and who's going to know? These were very strong Catholics. And they asked the Pope, do you think that, because they were very aware of the fact that the Merovingian line, and they were very aware of Clovis I and the sacred ampule, and the fact that these Merovingian kings were ruling under direct authority of God. They just didn't, decide to do it on their own, and they were good enough Christians to call and get a hold of the Pope and ask him the question, do you think that the king should be someone like Childeric, or should it be someone who has more power and influence and ability to hold on to these lands, to keep these lands from being invaded, and to keep on developing this society? Okay, and the Pope agreed. He said, no, the one who should be king should be the one who has the most power and influence. So he approved of them deposing Childeric. He was not killed. He and his 2 sons were taken to a monastery where their hair was cut off, and that was meaning that their royal duties as well as their royal powers were taken away from them. The same as when Samson had his hair cut. He lost his power. So now we have a problem because Pepin was then the one, because Martel was a much greater tactician with fighting these other tribes, okay? And so his son Pepin the Short, that was his name, he was therefore made king. But when the Pope actually came to France, it was the first time that a Pope had done so. This was Pope Stephen II. He was well aware of the permission given by Pope Zachary, and he went ahead and he coronated Pepin the Short, as well as his 2 sons, who were Charlemagne and Carloman. Now you can see that the Lord was actually building this monarchy. Okay, he was developing a bloodline, a royal lineage and divinely instituted bloodline for the protection of his church. And this remained. That's how it started. When Pope Stephen needed protection, he came to Charles Martel and Pepin. And this continued. Now, when Pepin passed away, his son Charlemagne became king. Actually, he's referred to as the first Carolingian king. And he continued his father's protection of the Pope. But it wasn't just the Pope. The Pope wanted protection for Christian civilization. He was wanting Europe, which was the old Roman Empire, to become the Holy Roman Empire. This would be the area that would be Christendom. Those baptized persons who were baptized into the church, struggling with becoming sanctified, some falling away, some falling into sin, some coming back, but it would be a Christian world, a civilization. And that's what he was building. The Pope needed temporal protection to deal with these problems, while the Pope was the spiritual flank. And he got this from Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne took after his grandfather, Charles Martel, very, very strongly, because he was as much of a warrior as Charles Martel was. Now, why only did his son Pepin become king? Because Charles Martel was, even though he was a great and very fervent Catholic, he was an illegitimate child. So that's why Pepin the Short became the king. And then when he had 2 sons, and the new dynasty had been, sanctified by the Pope coronating both Pepin and his 2 sons, returning it to the hereditary monarchy that he wanted it to be, and ordering no other person to become king unless they were in this lineage from Pepin the Short. A very interesting fact is that even though Charlemagne was king of the Franks, in the year 800, he went to Rome on Christmas Eve to attend Mass at the old St. Peter's. He had no knowledge of what was going to happen. When he came into Mass, the Pope coronated him right there as Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. So he was not just a king now, but he became the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And Charlemagne often remarked that he had no idea what the Pope was intending to do, and had he known, he would never have stepped inside the church. There's a lot of responsibility, but obviously he handled it very well. He also conquered the Lombards, who continually were very aggressive people. They were not Muslims. They were a northern Germanic tribe mixed with Scandinavian tribes, and they were extremely aggressive. Finally, he conquered them. His father, Pepin, gave several states in Italy to the Pope, and those became the basis for the papal states, to keep it as their own so no one could claim that property or take it from the Pope in the future. We thought it would be really interesting to include a short video on Trump's Bible, which he keeps in the Oval Office. So here you go. Enjoy.
There was a great revival in the Hebrides in the early 1900s. Began to moved up to the pleading for it into the 40s. Maybe we could say it topped out in the early 50s.